Hey there, welcome back to another video. This time it is a review of the 1987 fantasy comedy Harry and the Hendersons. Now, Harry and the Hendersons is one of those films that was pretty common throughout the 80s, trying to ride on the coattails of E.T., trying to have like a cute main character and have a little bit of a adventure, a little bit sort of a comedy. I would say this is less E.T. and more Short Circuit. And if I had to pick between the two, I definitely would pick Short Circuit over this. I think Short Circuit is a more effective and memorable film. But Harry and the Hendersons, it's no slouch. It doesn't completely trip over its big feet. It's a fun, harmless time waster. It's an entertaining film that can pass the time for a good amount of your time and is fairly entertaining. The thing with Harry and the Hendersons for me is that it just never seems to rise above the typical everyday average script that it has, which just seems to just copy and paste all of these tropes from films from this particular era, especially family films. And the fact that it becomes so predictable definitely hurts the film for me. It doesn't give it as big of an impact as it possibly could have had. That being said, it still has some really fun set pieces. And the overall idea of a friendly Bigfoot is a fun idea, especially for 1987, because before this, Bigfoot films weren't about friendly Bigfoot. They were about Bigfoot that's gonna maul you, or in the case of Night of the Demon, rip your dick off and throw it in the bushes. You know, Bigfoot was not known to be this benevolent creature. So it was a welcome change of pace to have a benevolent Bigfoot in your film. Of course, after Harry and the Hendersons, Bigfoot, almost every time you saw Bigfoot, it was in a film that was trying to be the next Harry and the Hendersons, or the design of Bigfoot was heavily inspired by Harry and the Hendersons. I mean, even the most common Bigfoot thing that we see nowadays, the Jack Link's beef jerky commercials, you can clearly see a bit of Harry in that design of that Bigfoot suit. And that's for a reason, because a lot of people saw this, and that the Harry, wonderfully portrayed by Kevin Peter Hall in this film, Harry is the quintessential Bigfoot on film for many people. And I can totally see why, because before it was just not very lifelike. There wasn't really a lot of energy behind the Bigfoot suits. It was just a guy in a suit. And Harry in this is much more than just a guy in the suit. Because Kevin Peter Hall, if I could say his name correctly, Kevin Peter Hall, he was an incredibly talented and underrated actor who could really bring to life these characters under all of these pounds of makeup and really bring out his personality and his charisma in ways that I really had never seen before, and I haven't really seen since. Kevin Peter Hall, to me, was the best suit actor that I've ever witnessed on film. He could be intimidating and scary, like in Predator, or in Predator 2, or he could be lovable and kind, like in Harry and the Hendersons. This is a very talented suit actor. And this film almost didn't have his presence, because Kevin Peter Hall was busy doing the show Misfits of Science. He felt that since he was doing that show, that he was now a serious actor and he wasn't going to do suit work anymore. And Rick Baker, he really wanted Kevin Peter Hall to play Harry, because he knew how talented Kevin was, and he knew what he would bring to the role. And he was really disappointed that Kevin wasn't going to be able to do it. So they ended up going with some other guy who had only done a few extra work and didn't really have that much experience in the suit, and it just wasn't very good from day one. And thankfully, Misfits of Science gets canceled. I mean, not necessarily for Kevin Peter Hall, but thankfully for this film, for the production of Harry and the Hendersons, Misfits of Science gets canceled, and Kevin Peter Hall is now available. Well, the thing is, Rick Baker had spent all this time and money putting together a suit for this other actor. And Rick did a very selfless thing, and he paid for all of the new molds and everything for Kevin, so Kevin could be Harry. And, I mean, the rest of the film speaks for itself. I mean, this film is not anywhere close to being as enjoyable as it is without Kevin Peter Hall's presence. So I definitely wanted to share that little bit of trivia because it's actually stuff that I heard from Rick Baker himself, because I saw this film in the theater a few months ago in 35mm at the Hollywood Theater in Portland, Oregon, and Rick Baker was there. I got to meet him after the show, shake his hand, I got his autograph. It's such a mesmerizing experience. It's one of those things where the film paled in comparison, but it was still worth seeing, and it was still an enjoyable little film. But hearing from Rick Baker, hearing his stories about making the film, and little anecdotes, and hearing how close he was with Kevin. I never knew that Rick and Kevin were nearly inseparable. I never knew that they were such close friends, and such close friends from early on. Kevin and Rick crossed paths when I think Rick was kind of doing a sort of casting call for the Creature in Without Warning, and he saw Kevin Peter Hall and was like, this guy's perfect. And they immediately formed a bond, and you could definitely see the pain and the grief in Rick's face when he was talking about losing his friend, Rick. I mean, not Rick, not losing his friend Rick. He didn't lose himself, but he lost a little bit of himself, if you think about it, considering how close he and Kevin were. So you could see the pain and the grief in his face when he was talking about losing Kevin. And that was very touching. And he also threw in some fun stories too, like how he was really leery about doing this film, and the reason why is because it was an Amblin production. And if you followed Rick Baker's career, you know about Night Skies. It was a film that he was working on effects for Steven Spielberg. It was a darker alien story, and Rick was commissioned by Steven to make all these different aliens, and Rick was doing some really revolutionary and groundbreaking work with these aliens for this film. He was showing the animatronics to Steven Spielberg, and he was really impressed, and he put so much work and effort into it. And Steven, while he's off shooting, I believe it was Raiders of the Lost Ark. I think it might. I don't know if it was Kathleen Kennedy or some other gal who was there on the set. Maybe it was Matheson, his wife at the time. I'm not 100% sure. And so he is talking about Night Skies and everything. And this woman who's a coworker with him, she brings up this idea of like, why aren't there more nice aliens? Why do all these aliens have to be bad or nasty or evil? And that inspires him to change his trajectory for his next film and do something different, do something more wholesome with E.T. And so now he's changed his mind. He's going to do something different. And so he goes to Rick Baker's offices, and he's telling Rick, I'm not going to do Night Skies, but I'm going to do this new project. I'm going to do E.T. and I really want you to do the effects. And Rick's like, sorry, Steven, I can't. I have an obligation with American Werewolf in London. I can't do that. And apparently, and this is confirmed by Rick Baker. This is not a rumor. This is not, just something that was in a book that I read. This is real. Confirmed 100% by Rick Baker at this Q&A. Because I asked him about that. I asked him, like, what is... I asked him, like, are there any other projects that you worked on that ended up not getting made? And essentially, like, how does that make you feel? And just talking about sort of the whole thing with Night Skies. And I didn't even bring up Night Skies. Somebody else did. And then he went more into it. And he talks about how when you put that much effort into something and you put your heart and your soul into it and it gets taken away from you, he talks about how that's just one of the worst things. And you can tell that that still hurts. The Night Skies thing still stings. And the reason why is because it was, Steven Spielberg is this legendary director. He was, probably someone that Rick looked up to, and he did all this great work for Steven, and Steven was very appreciative of it. And then he can't do Steven's next film, and Steven flips out and gets pissed off and ends up, allowing hit pieces to be made about ineffective prototypes for E.T. in the magazines and stuff. And so, yeah, he's understandably upset. And that leads to Harry and the Hendersons and why Rick Baker's really leery about doing a film that is going to be made by Amblin, which is Steven Spielberg's production company. And he's like, I don't know about working with Steven. And he's like, well, if I'm going to be able to work with Steven, I want to talk to him. I want to hear from Steven. I want to work things out. And so he actually did get on a phone call with Steven Spielberg before he started work on Harry and the Hendersons. And Steven actually did, in his own way, apologize, which was a really nice thing to hear. I mean, unlike the stuff with Tobe Hooper and Steven Spielberg, I can officially say that I have proof now that they communicated with one another after Night Skies, and they had a sort of mutual agreement, so to speak. They allowed the water to go under the bridge. But the sort of Steven Spielberg, Rick Baker stuff doesn't stop here, though, because on the first day that Steven Spielberg was gonna show up on the set, Steven, unbeknownst to him, he had no idea what was gonna happen, and this is a day that Rick decided to kind of mess around a little bit. So you'd have a sequence where they're shooting Harry walking down a hallway, and Rick decided to put on one of the other suits, and then follow Kevin down the hall, and Steven Spielberg is there. This is his first day on set, and he's just seeing these shenanigans, and Spielberg apparently was like, "What the fuck? What the fuck was that?" So I love that. That was just a really funny story by Rick. And Rick, of course, is feeling like, oh my god, like, again, like, this whole thing between me and Steven, like, we squashed the beef, and then the first day he's on set, he sees this, shenanigans sort of thing, and he's just like, what the fuck? Oh man, I thought that was a really fun story. So definitely wanted to share that. I know I should probably get into my thoughts on the film. The reason why I'm talking about all of these extra added backstory and stuff, and talking about Rick Baker and stories from the film, is because That's honestly more interesting and engaging to me than the overall film itself. No offense to the movie. I think William Deere did a fine job directing the film, especially with shots in the wilderness and working around this larger than life character and Harry. And Kevin Peter Hall was just a marvel in the suit. And the suit itself by Rick is just a spectacular creation. It looks real. And I especially really loved how the eyes are able to show so much expression. And even the face is able to show all these different expressions despite the fact that it's just this giant, the reason why Harry's head is shaped the way it is so it could have the servos inside, so it would be able to do all these different movements and stuff. Now, and there are other aspects of the film that I also enjoyed. I mean, I liked the song at the end credits by Joe Cocker. I thought that was a really good song by Joe Cocker. Love Lives On. And there are some really cute moments in it between the interactions between the family and Bigfoot and stuff like that, between Harry. John Lithgow, was nice to see him in a role where he's not playing a psycho or a bad guy. Like, he's playing an everyday family man, and it was a nice casting choice, and I thought John did a great job. He did a great job emoting and actually developing what seemed like a genuine love for this furry guy, for this, giant beast. Like, he really did develop a real connection with him. Melinda Dillon, she was fine as Nancy, your typical harried mother, and she does a great job with that role, but it just seemed like kind of a given, considering it's Melinda Dillon. Like, that seems to be the type of role that she seemed to only get in the 80s, and it's a shame too, especially when you look at her performance in Close Encounters of the Third Kind. That's a great performance, and it's got different layers to it, and it's really a shame that she just became like the next choice to play the 80s mom after Mary Ellen Trainor, because that's really what it was. It's either Mary Ellen Trainor or it's Melinda Dillon. Margaret Langrick as Sarah Henderson, the daughter, like, she was there. She didn't really leave that much of an impression. Joshua Rudoy as Ernie Henderson. I don't think the kid was bad. I don't think his acting was bad. I just think the lines he was given weren't that great, and he was fairly annoying to me. That typical sort of kid in the 80s where he's just a catchphrase machine, or he's just there to be comic relief, and I didn't really find him to be that funny, and I don't know, I just wasn't really into that kid. He didn't really do that much for me. Don Ameche, he's wonderful as Dr. Wallace Wrightwood. David Suchet as the villain, Jacques Lafleur, like, I didn't really, he really was not, in my opinion, the right casting choice. I don't think it was the right guy for that particular role. He does fine, but David Suchet, I mean, he's Poirot to me. Like, he's Hercule Poirot. Like, when I see him, and I know he did Poirot after this, but I didn't really buy him. He wasn't that intimidating. And then you have the whole typical predictable stuff in the end where, he's not really that bad, and, there was no real villain in this. There was no real antagonist, and I definitely feel that hurt the film. It prevented the film from having a bigger footprint, because you don't have a true antagonist. So you have a guy who, he's there, he wants to get Harry, but you don't really believe that he's gonna go all out, and you definitely see that in the end, because he eventually has a change of heart, and it's just like, I don't know. I mean, that type of ending is just, it's tiresome. And that's one of the problems, the biggest problems I have with Harry and Hendersons. What prevents it from being a film that really has a bigger impact on me, a film that like I said, leaves a bigger footprint, is that it's so typical and average in terms of its story, in terms of all the different beats, in terms of the whole things where, oh, well, we're going to try to have Harry stay, but he can't stay. And then now Harry's, he's upset and he goes on the run. And now there's somebody trying to catch him. And we have to try to find him before the bad guy does. And the bad guy's going to have a change of heart in the end. And they're going to let Harry go back to his family, and you're gonna have that sequence where the dad, the essentially one of the main protagonists, and John Lithgow, his character, George Henderson, he's gonna slap Harry and tell him to go, and Harry doesn't want to go, that kind of stuff, and it's just so tired and stale nowadays. And I think even in the 80s it was pretty stale. And I think when Harry isn't on screen doing all these surreal, crazy things, and when you don't have Kevin Peter Hall's larger-than-life personality in your face, the film is just below average. It's one of those films where if you didn't have Harry, you don't have a movie. Despite the fact that John Lithgow is doing his best, and even actors like Emmet Walsh, who plays his dad, are also giving their all, and the other members of the family, they're given not a whole lot, so they're doing the best that they can with what they have to work with, but it's kind of it's honestly slim pickings. So it's one of those films where it's a high concept film. And the concept is the most effective part of the film. Not the storytelling, the concept. And so that's what makes the film still a time waster for me. That's what makes the film still enjoyable, but not one of my personal favorites. Because all of these different other plot elements that are fairly predictable and don't really resonate that well with me. Some of the attempts at humor just come across as kind of lame. There's no real conflict. There's no real antagonist, and that really hurts the film in terms of its pacing, in terms of the ability for it to continue to grab me with its furry arms. But I can't help but really smile at the scenes with Harry and with Kevin's performance and with Rick's creation of this Bigfoot that's just benevolent and lovable, and you just want to give him a big hug. It's one of those films. The movie didn't do that well when it came out. It was honestly a little bit of a disappointment for the studio. It was made for $10 million, which, to be honest, doesn't seem like a whole lot, and you can tell a good chunk of it more than likely went to the suit, the Bigfoot suit. The box office, it made $50 million. It made $50 million and only made $29.8 million in the US, and it made $20.2 million worldwide. So it didn't really do that great in the box office. Rick himself and a lot of other people who were involved with the film, they tend to look at the lack of its box office success being because the marketing was not that great. So you had all these posters and all these other different things for Harry and the Hendersons, but there's no Harry. They didn't want to give away the Bigfoot, but then by not having the Bigfoot on the poster, then people didn't really know what it was about. And the trailer didn't really show a whole lot either. So a lot of people were just kind of like, huh? So, yeah, it's one of those films where the advertising might have let it down, definitely. And also, it opened at the same time as Beverly Hills Cop 2 and The Untouchables. I mean, those were two films that more than likely were going to do better than Harry and the Hendersons, especially Beverly Hills Cop 2. But it did well in other aspects. It won an Academy Award for Best Makeup. I mean, it definitely deserved that. 100%. I mean, the makeup in this is the real highlight by Rick Baker. and as well as the performance by the late great Kevin Peter Hall. So yeah, I don't know what else to say about Harry and the Hendersons except, oh, and there's another thing I want to mention. I really liked the end credit sequence. It was a take on the music video for Aha's Take on Me, with the whole drawings that come to life and everything. I thought it was really clever, unique end credit sequence. Really well done too, and it ties into George Henderson's character because he's an artist. So that actually felt like, it felt sincere. It didn't feel like it was just a straight up gimmick or anything. It actually felt like it actually had a connection to the character and to the film. But anyway, yeah, I don't know what else to say about Harry and the Hendersons, except if I were to rate it out of 5 stars, I give it 3. I give it 3 out of 5 stars. It's, like I said, it's a time waster. It's an okay film. To me, it's not, for me personally, it's not a classic. For me personally, it's not a film that I would watch over and over again, but I could see why people have a soft spot for it. I could see why people might find it a lot more enjoyable with repeated viewings versus for myself, where it's just a film that if there was nothing else on, I'd watch it, or if I needed to put something on while I'm doing something, it seemed like a good pick for that. But there's definitely a decent amount of things that I appreciate about it and that I enjoyed about it. It's one of those films that I liked okay. I didn't love it, but I also didn't hate it. I didn't think it was a bad film. I thought it was an all right film. But anyway, thanks for watching my review, and as always, I will see you later. See ya.